Hello and welcome to All in the Addicted Gamblers podcast. My name is Brian, and I have lived experience with gambling harm. And tonight, I thought it was time to do a bit of a fresh start, start over. Not start over. That's not accurate, but if you want to hear my story, you gotta go way back to the beginning. You get bits and pieces of it throughout, but you gotta go way back to the early episodes. And I can't vouch for those episodes, as I did not have this microphone at the time. So I thought I would start over, talk about my story, talk about why I do the podcast, and just talk about gambling in general. And this is strange for me because I am all alone. There is no Jeff tonight. I love Jeff to death, but he is relaxing at home, hopefully. And I have no guest tonight. So I just thought I would hop on here and talk about my own story about gambling harm. And I think I'm doing this because I just came from a GA meeting and I'm inspired and I feel good and I want to talk about gambling more. The GA meeting could have gone for another 2 hours and I would have been perfectly happy because that's how much I enjoy talking about gambling harm. So I think to start this, we got to begin at the beginning. The beginning began. I stole that from Joe Blow on YouTube, which is a great channel if you like movies. But anyway, so my story starts. I always say it starts in college, but that's not true because as a kid, I gambled. I gambled with my grandfather. He taught me how to play poker. And, that's all innocent fun. We're talking about a couple of dollars between grandfather and child, but he taught me how to play 5 card and 7 card stud. And I played with him and I played, different sort of card games with my family. And then when I was 12, and this is the first time I can remember being sort of addicted to gambling, when I was 12, there was a school slash church festival at the school slash church that I went to, Catholic kid, and they sold pull tabs. Which, if you're unfamiliar with pull tabs, then you're not from Minnesota, because Minnesotans are familiar with pull tabs, and I'm sure other states, but Minnesota's the one I know of. But pull tabs are essentially just a scratch off with a physical aspect to it, where you literally pull back the cardboard to reveal if you have matched enough to get a winner. And I was able to buy a couple of these. I don't know if the gentleman's selling them, and I know who that gentleman was, but I won't name check him here because he's a good man. But he was, selling them to raise money for the church and the school. And I bought one, and they were $1 a piece. And I bought one, and bought two, and bought three, and bought four, and I ran out of money. And I found myself going back to my parents' car. And in my parents' car, because my parents were part of the church and the school, and so they were doing their own thing. So I went back to their car, I asked for their keys, I went to the car, and they had in their car, they had, loose change sitting around the car, as we all used to back in the day. Not so much anymore, but back in the day we had loose change. And I took their bag of loose change that was in the car. I think they had it for postage and stuff like that. But I took the bag, which had, I don't know, 20 bucks of change in it. And I spent all that money on pull tabs. And I never won, or if I did, I didn't really pay attention. But I remember taking the money. I don't remember if I won. And then as time went on, in high school, I gambled. I played poker. It was during the poker craze. I played poker with my friends. They were all into it. I had friends who would buy poker sets and, bust out their chips and stuff like that. And we played poker. We used to sit around and play blackjack around the table, and everybody would take turn being the house. We didn't use enough card decks, so the house always got screwed, which was funny. But my gambling that caused me to lose my mind was started when I was a freshman in high school, freshman in college. I went to Eastern Michigan University. I about a month in, some friends called from some other schools. Everybody's scattered around the state of Michigan, and a friend called and said, "Hey, we're gonna go up to this casino," and it was Soaring Eagle Casino. It was a tribal casino, so you could get in at 18. And they said, "We're gonna play blackjack. We're all gonna go to the casino together and play blackjack." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds fun. I'll meet you there." So we all went and sat around the blackjack table, which is really fun when you're sitting around with your friends. It's a good time. Um, but I won that night, I won money, and I stupidly had a full-time job when I went to college, which was not a good way to do college with a full-time job and a full-time class load. And so I I won money and I thought, wow, I won enough money where going to work the next day didn't seem like such a great idea because I won more money than I was going to make the next day at work. But I won money on blackjack. I and eventually, well, the next time I went, I was the only one there, and it was a few days later. And the drive was 2.5 hours from my dorm room to the casino. So 5 hour round trip is what we're talking about. And a 5 hour round trip, 2.5 hours of thinking about gambling is when you anticipate gambling, when you anticipate your addiction, it just feels so damn good. And I did that my entire freshman year of college. Um, I always say within about 3 months, but probably before that, I knew I was addicted. I was playing blackjack. I had a girlfriend at Michigan State and wonderful person, but I would visit her and I would stay with her sometimes in the dorm room. But as I started gambling more, at about 10 o'clock at night, I would say, yeah, I got to get back, got to get up early in the morning. And that was not my, I didn't care. I was somebody who was like, whatever, I'll deal with it later, as evident of my gambling addiction. But I ended up just leaving her dorm room and saying I was going back to my dorm room back in Ypsilanti, Michigan. This was in East Lansing, Michigan. But I would leave East Lansing and drive up to the casino, which was about an hour and 10 minutes away from her dorm room. And I would play blackjack all night long. And, some other times I would play some other games in there, but mostly it was blackjack at that time. And then about halfway through my freshman year, I realized I was addicted and I called the helpline in Michigan at the time. And I decided that I would not tell them that I had an addiction, but I would tell them that I was writing a paper because I thought I would outsmart them and not let them know that I was addicted. So I called and I said, hey, I'm writing a paper about gambling addiction. Can you send me some information? And they did. And it was full of useful information about gambling harm. But the thing they sent me that I remember them sending me was the 20 questions, which if any of you have been to Gamblers Anonymous, you get asked these 20 questions usually at your first meeting. And they say that if you answer yes to 7 or more of these questions, you probably have a gambling addiction. And I answered yes to, I don't know, 15 or 16 at the time. And I knew, I was like, okay, I know I'm addicted. But that didn't stop me. I decided I would break up with the girlfriend, and that, poor girl. At one point, her and my friend Mike came with me to the casino one night because they decided, hey, we would like to come with you. And I was like, all right, well, I don't recommend that, but sure, come with me. And they came and they for a while they gambled on their own. They went, I think they played some slot machines and stuff, and I was playing blackjack. And then eventually they sat down behind me at the blackjack table, and 6 hours went by, and they're still sitting behind me. And I don't think they were pleased, but that's how I gambled. And that's how all of you, I'm sure, are gambling. And it was a wonderful and terrible experience all at once. Wonderful because at the time I was gambling, I was having a great time, and I had money to do so, but quickly the money ran out. But eventually, because I had that full-time job, I still had money to gamble, and I turned 19. And those of us from a certain part of Michigan were close to Canada, and you could go over the border. This was before 9/11, and you could get over the border pretty easily before 9/11, pretty quickly. And I remember we all used to, when we would go over there to drink alcohol, because you could drink at 19, you could gamble at 19, and we would go over there to drink alcohol. We would all, I don't know why this started, but the rumor was like, don't tell them you're going over there to drink. Tell them you're going over there to gamble, because they looked kindly upon gambling, but drinking, they would look out for you when you came back across the border, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that was the case. Anyway, I would gamble at the casino all night long in Canada. And one night I saw, I was sitting at the blackjack table with these guys. And in blackjack, if you don't know the rules, you can really destroy someone's hand by taking their card or not playing by the rules. And I watched one guy not play by the rules, and the other guy did not appreciate it, and they started yelling at each other at the table. And I was not there for that, because by that point I was addicted, and I was there to sort of numb out and relax and escape life and enjoy the gambling. And watching people yell at each other was not that enjoyable. So I decided that I would stop playing blackjack, and I moved on to roulette. Got kicked out of school for gambling. I mean, that wasn't what was on the paper. I was academically dismissed, but I was academically dismissed because I didn't go to class. I didn't go to class because I was out all night gambling. So I would sleep through class and I would sleep through work and I would be late to work, or I would show up smelling like the casino at work, which was not a great thing because it smells like cigarettes. And so at the end of my freshman year, I had to move back in with the parents, which everybody does. But when my friends all went back to school, I stayed living with my parents for a while. Eventually moved out, got an apartment with my buddy Chris, who started this podcast with me. You know, if you listen to the original story, you can hear him talk. I was working 2 jobs at the time. I was working at essentially a super Walmart, but those of you from the Midwest know Meijer, and I was working at Meijer, and it was a grocery store slash everything else store that you buy clothes and household items and everything else. It's like a super Walmart. And so I was working 2 jobs. So again, I had plenty of income to gamble with. And so I did that for a few years and I would gamble off and on. And, you know, I knew I shouldn't be doing it, but I just did it. And then times would go where I wouldn't do it. But like all of you know, when you're gambling, if you have money, you're going to go do it. If you have money and time, for me, it was money and time. Those were the two. We moved in and out of a few apartments. And then I ended up living in what I would call a trailer, which some would call a mobile home. My buddy Jason, his grandmother was moving to Alabama, and he said, "Hey, I have this trailer that I'm moving into. You wanna move in there with me, and rent will be super cheap." And it was. I remember I paid like $220 in rent, which is crazy because I pay like 1,800 now in rent. So it's crazy to me that at one point I was paying $220. But we had a great time, but I was still gambling at the time, you know? And I'm like 22, 23, going to the casino all the time. And eventually, the trailer ended. I remember telling Jason one night, like, I got to move out. And he's like, why? What, you work 2 jobs. Why are you moving out? And I was like, oh, gambling. Gambling was he knew. And then he convinced me to stay, but eventually that time ended and Chris and I got an apartment together. And in that apartment, Chris and I Chris would never gamble with me. He was not a big gambler. And I was not one to let people gamble with me because I knew what kind of gambling I did, and it was dirty all night gambling. It wasn't that normal gambling where people go for the evening, spend their $40 and go home. It was the gambling where I would stay out all night long and sacrifice sleep for gambling. But at one night, and this all happened around the age of 23, 24, a few things happened. At 23, 24, Chris and I went gambling one night, and I knew I was addicted, but I knew in my head I was addicted. I never said it out loud to anybody. And you guys all know, like, once you say it out loud to somebody, then you have to deal with the problem and you have to solve the problem and you have to stop gambling. And I didn't want to stop gambling because I was convinced I could win my way out of it. And in this time frame, I had gotten my first credit card, started taking cash advances and dipping into, accumulating debt due to my gambling. I got fired from my job, and now I worked for my uncle. My uncle, my mom's sister's husband. He had a company. It was manufacturing based, and I worked there for a long time. I worked there in high school. I worked there in college. I worked there after I got kicked out of college. I worked there all throughout my 20s. But at one point, I got fired from the job, and that was because I was showing up late. And I was showing up late because I was out all night gambling. And when I got fired, I went, got another job. I decided, I've had enough of working 2 jobs. I'm going to go back to school, right? I'm going to right the ship. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to solve my life problems. Fresh start. Fresh start. This would be the first fresh start of many. I said to my grandfather, hey, listen, I want to go back to school. I'm going to go to community college, take classes. Would you co-sign a loan for me? Because at this point, I think I had told my parents about the gambling, so they would not co-sign a loan for me, and smartly and rightly. So they said no. So I went to my grandfather and I said, would you co-sign a loan so I go back to school, start my life over? And he was like, that's a great idea. I know you got fired, so this is a good idea. So he co-signed the loan. It was $4,000. It wasn't a lot of money, but it's still a lot of money. And I call him and I say, hey, I got the check in the mail. Thank you so much for co-signing the loan. I'm going to go back to school, blah, blah, blah. And at the time he says, hey, why don't you not take, send the check back? and I'll just give you the $4,000. Now, I don't know why we didn't have this conversation when he was co-signing, but past is past. But anyways, he said, why don't you send the check back and I'll just give you the money and you can pay me back interest free. And I was like, that's a great idea. Now, I am a gambler and I know you all know what is coming next is that I did not send the check back and I did take his $4,000. So I had $8,000 and I lost it all in 2 nights in Detroit at the MGM Casino in downtown Detroit. Now, a little bit of a backstory. When I started gambling, Detroit did not have any casinos. At this point, a few years later, Detroit had 3 public casinos. Public meaning that they were owned by people or corporations. Everybody had their hands in the cookie jar. It was not a tribal casino. I went to MGM and I played this slot machine and I lost. At this point, I was gambling on slot machines because I used to play roulette. I used to play blackjack, moved to roulette. Roulette got to be too slow, which some of you can understand. And so I started playing slot machines because I didn't, A, want to be around people because people take a long time to place their bets. And B, it takes a long time to watch people place their bets. And I want to gamble faster and alone. And so slot machines were it, right? You play that max bet, you press the button, hopefully you hit a jackpot or a bonus and you get a bunch of money. That's the hope. That's not what happened ever. I mean, it happened once in a while. But once you win on a slot machine, once you hit a bonus or a jackpot, you're convinced that you can do it every time, right? You can oh, I know how this is going to land. I'll do it again. So I go to MGM, I play for 2 nights. I spent about half each night. On the second night, I lost and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I'm leaving the casino and in the car, I started having a panic attack and I've never had one, so I didn't know what it was. I'm breathing all funny and awkward. And I decided that I should go to the hospital. I go to the hospital and I did not have insurance at this time because I no longer had my job that I had insurance through. And I accumulated another $2,000 bill from going to the ER for a panic attack. So that was an expensive 2 nights. That was 10 grand right there that I blew. So I didn't go to school. And then in that same time frame, Chris and I went to the casino. Chris was not a gambler. Chris, he would do his 40 bucks on a slot machine, find it pointless. But Chris liked to drink, and the casino served drinks. So he drank, I drove, we gambled. I gambled much more than him. In the time it took him to lose his $40, I lost my $1,000. And at the end of the night, he was drunk enough where I said, hey man, let me have your ATM card and code and I will win us our money back. Right? Like he cared about his $40, but he was drunk enough where I convinced him, or maybe he just had faith in me as a good friend and wanted to help me. I don't know, but I took his ATM card and took his, I think he had about 400 bucks in there and I took it out and I gambled it and I lost it in a few minutes. And we're walking out of the casino. And this is the first time in my life where someone said to me, you have a problem and you need to get help. And I don't know about all of you, but when it was just me who knew I had a problem, it didn't matter. But when somebody else saw it, it affected me. And I thought, oh God, I can't. You're right. I do. You know what? It's time. It's been 6 years since I started gambling. I need to stop. All right, I'm going to get help. I'm going to go to Gamblers Anonymous. So the following Thursday night, it was a Gamblers Anonymous meeting in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I went to it. And it was in a church basement. And I walked in, and there were 3 other people, 2 females, 1 male, all over 45, 50. I was 24. I did not relate to them. I did not feel welcomed. And that is not a judgment on Gamblers Anonymous, and I'll get into that in a little bit. That's just the reality of the situation. And so the following week, I went back and I sat in the parking lot and I watched a few people go in, and I did not get out of my car. And so the following week, I decided to say, I was living with Chris and I was like, oh, I don't have gas money. I haven't gotten paid yet, so I don't have gas money, so I'm not going to go. But don't worry, I'll go. And eventually I didn't go. And I was just like, I can do this myself, right? I cannot gamble on my own. How hard is it not to do something? It's not that hard. I'm a pretty lazy person. I don't need to gamble. I won't. So I decided, you know what? I'm not going to drink and drive. That's something I'm not going to do. And so I decided that I would drink Jameson every night until I was drunk, and then I wouldn't drive. And that worked for about 2 weeks. I drank every night, didn't drive, but I was drunk and feeling miserable every night because you can't just drink whiskey every night because that really affects you. And then I was just like, all right, you know what? I'm fine. I'm not going to gamble. And it worked for, 3, 4, 5 months. But all of a sudden, you don't gamble for 3, 4, 5 months. You have a gambling addiction and you don't gamble. And guess what? You got a little money built up. And then it starts to look pretty good when you haven't done it for a while, where you think, oh, I can manage this. I can control my gambling. But I couldn't. And I went back to gambling. And every time I went back to gambling, the amounts were higher, the damage was worse. I discovered new ways to get money. Now, the new ways to get money. Number one, lying. I was a freaking liar, a big time liar. I lied to my parents, I lied to my sisters, I lied to my friends, all to borrow money, One of the lies I used to tell was that I paid too many bills last month, right? I'm a good person. I'm a good citizen who paid too many bills. So could I borrow some money so I could get some groceries? But I would gamble that money. And I did that for years. And it was a disgusting, disgusting habit. And then I went to my first GA meeting at 24. And then when I was 26, I went to my second GA meeting. And that was because I was in the casino one night and I was gambling. I was playing a machine and I don't know if it was the smoke smell or just finally I had had enough of myself and I just got physically ill. I didn't throw up, but I felt like throwing up from my gambling. And I had about $200 left in my hand and I put it all back in the machine. And I just kept pressing the button until I didn't even look at the machine. I pressed the button until it was gone. I didn't care if I won, lost, whatever. I just wanted that money gone. I wanted no money. I was disgusted with myself and the use of money. And I pressed the button until it was gone. I walked out of the casino. I went home and I went to the GA meeting in Livonia, Michigan, which is a brilliant, brilliant meeting. I don't know if anybody from that meeting will ever hear this, but those people saved my life. I went to that meeting. It was a Monday night, and they were kind. I walked in. They were welcoming. They said, "Are you new?" But because I had gone to the one meeting, I said, "No, I'm not new." So I never got that like new member treatment where you kind of get asked the 20 questions, and you get told about how sponsors work and that sort of thing. So I never really got that because they thought I'd already been in GA, so they thought I knew, which I really didn't because that first meeting did not do a great job of explaining it to me. And that's okay, is what it is. But I went to that meeting every single week for 2.5 years, and I can still picture their faces. Some of those nice people I know have passed on, unfortunately, but that's what happens. I was 26. Most of these people were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And that's what GA is built on, is these people who have been in there for a long time, and they're very helpful, so very helpful and very kind. And I miss those people. I miss what they did for me. I can't thank them enough for what they did for me. But 2.5 years of going to the meeting, I started going to other meetings because somebody I knew would be getting a pin, and you would get a pin at like a year after you've been in there for a year, you little GA pin. And I'd go to those meetings and celebrate with people that they were getting that pin. And I got my pin, and it was wonderful. My parents came, which for them, I think it was very nice. You got to think about it from a parent's angle. Everybody always says, you're responsible for these kids till 18. But in my case, they were responsible for me till I was into my early 30s, unfortunately. And not that they were responsible for me, but they were worried about me, right? They were worried. They were worried about their child. And GA is big on talking about don't bail out people. Bailouts are bad. And it's right, because it just kind of makes us think that we can gamble more if we're bailed out, right? Reset it to zero and we can gamble more. So my parents did help me financially through that time. But they didn't, nobody knows any better. You have this, it's your child. You want to help that child, and they wanted to help me, and they did. So I think it was really nice for them to come and see me get a year of not gambling. They were happy with me. They were proud of me, But about 2.5 years in, I was just tired. I got home from work. I had gotten my job back at the company that I was fired from, my uncle's company. The guy who fired me got fired, so that was funny. But I got my job back, and I was working in manufacturing again, and I was going to work all the time, and I was sort of paying back my parents, saving some money, paying bills. And during this time, I'd moved in and out of my parents' place a few times. And so the night that I remember not going to GA, I was just like, you know what? I'm tired. I'm not going to go tonight. I've been for 2.5 years every single Monday night, but I'm not going to go tonight. And I didn't. And the following week came, and I was like, boy, that was nice not going. I'm not going to go again. And then the following week came, and boy, that was nice not going. I'm not going to go again. And eventually I was just like, I don't need to go to GA. I'm good. I graduated. I can control myself. And within 6 months, I found out that no, that was not true. It was Gamblers Anonymous that was keeping me from not gambling. I don't know that I fully bought into the program, but I went every week as a reminder not to gamble. And so within 6 months, I was gambling again. And like I said earlier, when I stopped gambling and would gamble again, the amounts got higher, the credit was better, the availability of money was more. And so my amounts that I gambled was higher, and the damage I did was worse. And I just got back into it, playing slot machines. It's not that I didn't win. I would win from time to time, but like many of you, when you win, you think, okay, well, I can win again. And then when someone puts a stack of cash in your hand, I never won a giant jackpot. I was not these $50,000 winners, but I would win jackpots of $4,000 or $8,000 or something. And they would put the stack of cash in your hand. And when they do that, you think you're invincible. You're like, I've got all the room financially to gamble tonight. So I'd go in the bathroom. My ritual was to go in the bathroom stall and then count the money after they had already counted it, but it was fun to count. Take a quick breather. I'd take all the hundreds, put them in my pocket, gamble all the little bills, the 50s, the 20s, everything under that. And then when that ran out, I would go back into my pocket that I said I wouldn't touch, and I would start gambling that money. And how I gambled was to take, I was a check to check guy. So I would go to the bank account. Bank account would have, let's say $800 in it. I would take out $500, go to the casino, use that money, go to the ATM, take out everything but about $20 that was left in the account. Because my bank, TCF Bank, would let me over withdraw my account by $300 or $600. And so as long as I had a positive amount. So after I used up whatever money was left, I would over withdraw the account. And then I would go to my credit card, take a cash advance off a credit card machine, go to the cage, look at those people in the face asking for money off my credit card, which is always embarrassing. And then gamble that money. And, inevitably it would always lose. I would lose because I couldn't leave. There's no thing I heard in GA, which is I can't win because I can't leave. And that was the truth. And the addiction is real. You just keep thinking, like, if I gamble a little longer, I'm going to win. And it feels great gambling. It just feels so good. The bonus sound on a slot machine, most of the bonuses, you would hear this sound where it's like a rising sound of 3 beats, and it would be like a bump, bump, bump. And that third bump was the one that would get you into the bonus round. The bonus round was always like, all right, light up another cigarette, sit back and relax, because here comes the money. I'm about to be a millionaire. That was never the case, but that was always what was in my mind. So I got into financial trouble again, had to confess to my gambling addiction again, move back home with my parents again, move out of my parents, stop gambling, go back to GA. But I thought this time I'm not going to go back to GA. I am going to work 3 jobs, because my 2 things that would make me gamble, time and money. And I thought, if I don't have any time to gamble and I work 3 jobs and all I do is make money, well, boy, that is a solution. That is going to be how I conquered this addiction. And so I got 3 jobs. I worked 96 hours a week. It was hell on earth. I was tired. I was so very tired. I would fall asleep. I would make dinner when I would get home at like 11:30 at night, and I would just fall asleep with it on my chest and wake up with it spilled onto the floor in the morning. So these 3 jobs. One was like a cleaning job where I cleaned a business for 3 nights a week, 4.5 hours a night. And then another was my manufacturing job, which I would work 4 10-hour days. And then the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I found a weekend job refurbishing cell phones in a sort of a manufacturing environment. And that was another full-time job. It was 36 and a half hours, I think, or something like that a week. So I had no time to gamble, and all I did was make money. Perfect solution, right? Well, Sunday nights, there was a small block of time where I didn't work. I got out of work at 6:30, and I did not have anything to do until I went to bed. Now, after working 96 hours for the week, I figured going to bed would be pretty easy. But one night, some coworkers from the weekend job decided that we would go to a bar. And I've had in my 20s, I struggled with alcohol. I say struggled. I was like many 20-year-old, people in their 20s who were drinking for the first time. Like, this is fun. I enjoy this fun feeling. So I went out with these people. We did some shots, that sort of thing. I was dating a girl that I worked with. And when we started, I hadn't really gone to a bar with her. When we were at the bar, she was acting what I would say silly. And it bugged me. But of course I was drinking, so that was probably why. And I got pissy and I just decided I'm going to leave. So I left. And at this time, I was stupid and bought a Mustang GT, which I had always wanted a Mustang. And it was a stick shift, which is just fun to drive. If you haven't driven a powerful car with a stick shift, it's a goddamn good time. But I lived in Michigan and it was winter. So I asked my grandmother, could I borrow your car? Because she wasn't using it. She was in her late 80s, wasn't driving anywhere. She had a Buick. And I said, could I borrow this for the winter, for the 3 months of winter, so I could make it back and forth to work? And she said, sure. She hadn't driven it in 5 years. So I got in that Buick, headed down the highway. And a couple of miles down the highway, I was going like 75. I didn't think I was driving erratically or anything. I was in the left lane, just going 75. Speed limit in Michigan 70, going 5 over. Headed home. I was pissed off, but still driving normally, what I thought. All of a sudden, the car kicks to the right. I go across the lane to the right. Car flips over, goes into the grass. I'm getting dirt in my face. That's what I remember. I remember getting a lot of dirt in my face. Next thing I know, everything is calm. I open my eyes. I see the moon, bright, shiny moon. It's February. It's cold. I kind of realized, like, wait a minute. I was just driving a car. Why am I not in the car? And then I look over and I'm like, where's the car? And then it dawns on me. I was at a bar. Oh my God. I just crashed the car. I was at a bar. I'm going to go to jail. This is not good. This is not getting my life back on track. This is worse. This is going the opposite direction. And I looked behind me, and behind me were some trees, and then beyond that was a neighborhood. And I thought, well, why don't I just run away? But then I thought, well, it's my grandmother's car. They have her number. They have her name. She's linked to the car. They're going to know it was me. So I was like, oh crap, time to face the music. And then I stood up. My feet were freezing. I was like, why are my feet so cold? And I looked down. My shoes are off. My shoes are gone. My cell phone's gone. I don't know where anything is. I couldn't even see the car at this point. I didn't know where the car was. And that was because the car was flipped upside down, and you can't really see all the reflectors when it's flipped upside down, and it's in the ditch. And I was like, I look over and I see it, and I'm like, oh God. It just all came rushing back. And I was like, I am screwed. I'm going to jail. I panicked a bit. And then I heard the sirens. I went out to the road and started trying to flag people down. And then I heard sirens, and I was like, oh God, this is it. I'm gonna go to jail. I was so scared. And I was like, I finally did the stupid thing I thought I had gotten away with throughout most of my 20s, which was drinking and driving. And heard sirens, eventually fire truck, ambulance, police cars. They talked to me. I was like, I'm gonna have to do a breathalyzer. I'm going to jail. Well, I talked to, I don't know if it's a fireman or an ambulance driver or whatever, or a policeman. I don't remember. But somebody asked me, how did you get outside of the car? And I said, what do you mean, how did I get outside? I don't know. I woke up outside of the car. And they said, oh, okay, you got to go to the hospital. You were thrown out of the vehicle. I was like, that's when I was like, oh my God, I was thrown out of the vehicle. How'd I get out of the vehicle? And so I went to the hospital. I felt like the biggest jackass. I am somebody who quickly realizes when I do something wrong, and I am apologetic. I am also very remorseful, and I started bawling in the ambulance ride to the hospital. I apologized to every single person who stood over the gurney, the ambulance drivers, the doctors, the nurses, the aides who were there. I apologized to everybody. I was like, I'm so sorry that I put you in this situation. I can't believe I did this. And they're also nice. You know, they deal with this every day. And, you know, the only thing that really hurt on me at the time was my hand. I thought my hand was broken because it felt funny. They did an x-ray of my hand. It was okay. But then came the worst part. After all the embarrassment and the thinking that maybe I had hurt somebody, I didn't hurt anybody. Nobody else was involved in the accident. But I was living in an apartment at the time. I had to call my parents. I was 28 years old, and I had to call my parents and say that I was drinking and driving and that I'm in the hospital because I flipped over my grandmother's car, my dad's mom's car. That was a horrible phone call, but I made it. You know, when the first time they send us, when you drink and drive, they send a social worker in to deal with that aspect of it. And she said, "Is there anyone we can call?" And I said, "No." And they said, "You don't want to call anybody?" And I said, "No." And eventually she came back and I said, "Okay, let's call my parents." And I called, and I woke my parents up at like 2, 3 in the morning. And I said I was drinking and driving, which was just an awful, awful thing to say. My poor parents, they dealt with me gambling. Now they got to deal with their idiot son drinking and driving. And my dad was kind enough to come to the hospital. No judgment, no judgment. What a beautiful man. No judgment. He just came to the hospital, got me out of the hospital by morning. They had taken my blood, so that went off to the police, and they released me. And we drove. First, we drove down the highway, and as we were driving down the highway, we drove to like where the accident happened on the highway. So we drove to the highway, and on the highway, back about I'm gonna have this measurement wrong because it's a fuzzy memory, but I want to say 1/8 of a mile, maybe. My back left wheel was on the highway. And I was like, that's interesting. Why is my back left wheel on the highway? And then we went to the tow yard where the car was, and the car was smashed. Caved in, smashed, windows blown out, tire gone. And my dad looked at me and goes, "I don't know how you're alive." And I was like, "I don't know either. I don't know how I'm walking around." Car was smashed. I don't know what window I went out of. I don't know how my body wasn't sliced in half. So what had happened, as I was driving in the left-hand lane, what I thought was normally, my grandmother had not driven this car in 5 years. The back left wheel of the car had broken. Not the tire, the wheel, the axle broke, and the wheel came off the car, which is how the car kicked sideways and flipped over. And in the process of kicking sideways and flipping over and dirt hitting my face, the seatbelt in the Buick had broken. The seatbelt broke. And that's how I went sailing out of the car. I don't know if you believe in God or what. My mom certainly wishes I prayed a lot more because I've been in a lot of car accidents that I should have been killed in. Seriously, like I've been in 3, 4, I think, that I should have been killed in. And I wasn't. I was fine. Most of them I was fine. This car accident, I ended up getting bruised head to toe. I was bruised head to toe. I was very stiff, couldn't walk, but I was okay, right? Like I'm not gonna complain. I was fine. My dad was very kind, worried about me, said, "You know what, Brian?" Much like I said to my grandfather in those earlier years, my dad said, "I think it's time you move home. It's time to get your life right. You need to not work 3 jobs. You need to work 2 jobs, but you need to be healthy, right? You need to sleep. You need to eat right. You can't do that on 3 jobs." So at 28, I moved in with my parents. And that was so embarrassing to me because, my friends are they graduated, some of them got their master's degree. A lot of them were teachers, teaching in schools, buying houses, having kids, getting married. And I'm moving in with my parents. And I was depressed, so very depressed living with my parents because I thought this isn't what I should be doing, right? How did life get me here? This isn't what I wanted to be doing. But I was also very grateful that they let me live with them they had retired at this point, moved into an apartment. So I'm literally sleeping in an apartment across the hall from my parents. It was so bad. But they were very nice. My dad would make coffee every morning and pour me a cup, and I appreciated that. And I would go to my jobs, come home, and that's about all I did for a while. I quit my third job at the cell phone factory because I just couldn't go in. Like I was bruised head to toe. It was painful, but it was, and I thought I had gotten away with it. I was like, I drank and drove, flipped a car over and got away with it because that was February. And then October rolled around. And that's when I got a notice in the mail that I needed to report to court. February to October. I thought I had gotten away with it. And yet I had to report to court. And I reported to court, and court said, your license is suspended and you got to go get some counseling. So I saw a counselor, and the counselor, after talking to her for an hour, she said, you don't have a gambling, she said, you don't have a drinking problem. You have a gambling problem. And I said, yeah, I know. I know I do. And that's, I mean, yeah, drinking, maybe it caused the accident, maybe it didn't. I don't know. But I was in this situation due to gambling. I was working 3 jobs and tired and drinking because I was gambling. And that was just accurate. And so I had to see a counselor for a long time because of that. And it was very helpful to like talk about gambling, to talk about my addiction. When you don't talk about it, it just sits there dormant and you think it's okay if you do it again, and it's not. So after the accident, I went back to GA and moved in with my parents. And GA was great. The people in the meeting were like, yeah, we figured you were gambling again. That's what most people do when they disappear. They go back to gambling. And I did. But I came back to GA, and the first go around I had 2.5 years, and it was great. The second go around, I got another 2.5 years, was working, living with my parents. Everything was good until it was not. And I have to pee real quick. I'll be right back to finish this up. So everything was great. Well, not great, but working, paying bills, living at home. And then I went to work one morning, day after Easter, 11 years ago. And my mom texted me and said, hey, I'm at the hospital with your father. He had some pain. Now, backstory to this. When I was a senior in high school, I got a call to the office. I had to go to the office, and my mom was on the phone, and she said, hey, your dad went to the hospital, and I'm gonna, I think I drove to school that, like, she stayed home that day from work, and so I was able to borrow her car and drive to school. I didn't drive to school that often because I didn't have a car, so she let me drive her. So she said, hey, can you come pick me up? We gotta go to the hospital. So I went, and my dad had what is called aortic dissection, and you have an ascending and descending aorta. And I think it was the ascending aorta. My dad is something called aortic dissection, where your aorta balloons up. It's an aneurysm, and then if it gets too big, splits open, you bleed internally. It's very life-threatening. Those of you familiar with the actor John Ritter, that's how he died. So this happened. This was prior to when John Ritter died, but my dad had that happen when he was 52 years old. And luckily, his coworker saw that he wasn't feeling well and said, you need to go to the hospital, and took him to the hospital, and they performed life-saving surgery and saved his life. And that was amazing because, it saved his life. So that happened. I was senior in high school, so I was 17, 18. So this was 13 years later. And my mom texts me and says, hey, we're at the hospital. I'm at work, and I am, my immediate thing is like, hey, is this his aorta? Because you got to watch out for that again after that. And so she says, we're not sure, blah, blah, blah. Eventually she texts me again, says, come to the hospital. I get to the hospital. My dad, they were doing life-saving procedures on him as I walked in, and he died, in front of me. which is a sad story. And I talked about it in a previous podcast. It was a hard time, but my dad died, and suddenly, day after Easter, 11 years ago. Rest in peace, Brad. I gambled to feel good, right? I gambled to numb out, to escape, and to feel good. And I knew that him dying, I would want to feel good. And how was I going to feel good? By gambling, right? I had another 2.5 years of not. I've been to GA for 2.5 years now. I'm 31 years old, and or no, I was a week before my 31st birthday. Yeah, it was a week before my 31st birthday, that he passed away, and I knew that I would want to gamble, so I went to a GA meeting the night he died. It was a Monday, so that was my normal Monday night meeting, and I was like, I'm going to the GA meeting, and I went and I bawled my eyes out there. I cried. I told everybody what happened, but I thought it was the smartest move I could make. For my own well being. Like, I need to go to this GA meeting because I'm gonna want to gamble. So I went to the GA meeting as precautionary, and it worked, and it worked for a few months. But those of you who have dealt with grief, that it is a bitch, and it is relentless, and it never goes away. But I ended up, what would become about a year-long relapse, and the amounts that I gambled were insane, at least for my gambling compared to what I had done. And the worst part of all of that was that I had to tell my mom, whose husband just died, that her son, who was 31 and living with her, who hadn't gotten his life together, was now gambling again and had taken out a ridiculous loan to do so. And eventually my mom said, hey, listen, Brian, listen, it is sad here, right? You've been in Michigan most of my life. I'd lived in Michigan. And she said, it's sad here. You're surrounded by gambling. And this is before they had the online gambling, and I was surrounded by gambling. But she said, you know what? You always want to move to California. And this is a whole nother story, but I had always had, I want to get into acting, movie making, that sort of thing. And I had done stuff for that, done like stand up and improv and stuff. But she said, why don't you move to California? It's time for a change. It's sad here. You're gambling here. It's bad here. It's fresh start, right? Fresh start. Let's do it again. And I was like, that's a great idea. So in the midst of this relapse, I decide fresh start. So I work a bunch of overtime at my job, save up money, cash in my 401k. My mom lets me borrow a couple $1,000, and I moved to California. Load up my Ford Focus because the Mustang was gone. I traded it in for the Ford Focus in January of 2014. At the end of it, I moved to California. But on the way, you knew it was going to happen. On the way of this fresh start, you pass a lot of casinos when you're driving across the country. And I made it to Arizona. Almost made it. Super troopers. Anyway, almost made it. Passed a casino one night in Arizona. Got to, I was like, no, I'm not going. Got to my hotel room, paced back and forth, gave in. I got 10 grand in my bank account. I'm going to go gamble. So spent about $1,000 that night. And it's just at a casino that I hated. Like, it wasn't fun. It wasn't big. There weren't machines I liked. I just did it out of the habit of doing it. And then the next day when I was leaving Arizona, I drove to Las Vegas, gambled another couple $1,000. So I show up in California, rented a room from a wonderful woman, 71 years old, and she lived with her 99-year-old mother in her house in North Hollywood. And I moved into their house, and they rented rooms to other people, and they had this room for rent, and I found it, and she was very nice to take me in, and I paid her rent, and she knew I was out there. I didn't really know I was out there. I was out there. I was like, I want to do entertainment stuff. So when I got there, I decided, all right, I'm going to go to GA. So I went to GA out there, and nice people in there. It wasn't their fault, but it was a different meeting than what I was used to, right? I was used to the people in Michigan, and these were different people, and I wasn't comfortable. And then the other thing I did when I was out there, I was like, well, what can I do that I could just do from my room? So I wrote a book. Like, I'd always wanted to write a book, and I just thought I'll put my funny stories that have happened over the years in it. And some of it was about gambling and car accidents and all the stupid shit I did as a kid, and I thought it was funny at the time. Now I regret that book. The book is awful. It's a terrible, awful, disgusting book that I wrote when I thought I was being funny, but really I was just being mean. And I was mean to people. I renamed everybody, but I was mean to past relationships. I was mean to the spirit of it wasn't nice. And I regret doing that because it wasn't a good idea. It was just mean spirited. I was trying to be funny and I was mean. But some of it, and not all of it was mean, but some of it was just like genuine and gambling related stories and like addiction stories and my dad dying stories. And so this book that was partially, 20-30% about gambling addiction, to celebrate me publishing that book, and I self-published it. For anybody who wants to write a book, you can self-publish them. And I just thought it was cool that I had a physical copy of something that I wrote. I thought it was cool that I literally have a book. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. It was the first thing I ever like created and wrote the book. I don't know, it was like April. And I hadn't gambled since I gambled on the way in Las Vegas, but once I got there at the end of January, I didn't gamble again until like April, May, when I released the book. To celebrate a book about gambling that had partially to do with gambling addiction, I celebrated by going to Las Vegas and gambling. And driving from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, it's 4.5 hours one way. And like I said earlier about anticipation about gambling, and you guys all know this about anticipation about something that's addictive. It feels almost as good as doing it. And so I would drive out there and I would chain smoke in the car and I would drive to Las Vegas and I would park in a structure and I would think I was going to spend the night, but I ran out of all the money and I would not spend the night and I would turn around and drive back, which is a very disgusting drive when you're tired and you've lost all your money and you're panicked. So I did that a bunch of times. Eventually, I got a job working midnights in a hotel. I had a history of working in hotels midnights, which if you have the opportunity to work midnights in a hotel, do not do it. It is unsafe. Especially if you work for lower class hotels, it's totally unsafe because you're in there working by yourself, or maybe there's a security guard, but that security guard is getting paid as much as you to work there, and nobody really cares what goes on. You get a lot of prostitutes at nights in these hotels, even nice hotels. You get a lot of prostitutes, which is, that's cool. Sex workers are fine, but it's the clientele they bring in that cause trouble. And then it's just a bad environment. Overnight anywhere is a bad environment because bad things happen at night. Nothing good happens after midnight, right? That's the old saying. Anyway, I worked this hotel that was on the backside of Malibu. It was kind of a nicer area, so I didn't have as many troubles as I did when I was 19 working in a hotel in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the Microtel Inn and Suites where I worked alone and I got robbed and handcuffed to a pipe. That's a whole other story that I put in the book. Yeah, I got robbed at knife point. Big dude with a big butcher knife who stole my money at the hotel. But he handcuffed me to a pipe, and that's that story. But there I am gambling in California, like no better than I was in Michigan. A little more access to money, doing payday loans, doing shady internet loans, racking up a lot of debt, credit card debt, shady internet loan debt, payday loan debt. And then one day it ended because I lost everything I ever had. There was a game. There was a game on Game Boy. I think it was Caesar's Palace on Game Boy. When my sister had a Game Boy growing up, and there was a casino game, Caesar's Palace, and I remember playing blackjack. And on a game, you're just throwing all the money into one bet because it's a game. Why not? And in the game at the beginning, you would show up in like just a regular sedan. Like they had this little graphic, and you were like a little cartoon car that would show up in a sedan. And if you won, you would leave in a limo or a sports car, and if you lost, you would leave on a bus or a taxi. This video game came to fruition because I showed up to Connecticut. I showed up. I live in Connecticut now. I showed up to Los Angeles in a Ford Focus, and I left Los Angeles in a plane with 2 suitcases because my car was repossessed due to my gambling. And so it was time to leave California, and Chris re-enters the equation. My old buddy Chris from high school, who I gambled with that one time and I took his money. Chris lived in North Carolina, and Chris said, "Hey man, what's up?" And I called Chris the final morning I placed my last bet, July 23rd, 2014. I called Chris in the morning and I said, "Hey, I did it again," which was a common phrase for me to a lot of people. I did it again. And Chris, to his credit, was really trying to help me out, all this stuff, looking for credit, debt consolidators, that sort of thing. This is a lifelong problem that I'm trying to solve in 5 minutes. So it was a very lonely drive home from Las Vegas that final time. And I decided, Chris was nice enough to say, like, hey man, why don't you move to North Carolina where I am? You can sleep on my couch while you get back on your feet. And that was awesome, right? Like, what a nice friend. What a good freaking friend to let me sleep on his couch. And I did. I moved to North Carolina, placed my last bet July 23rd, 2014. But before I moved to North Carolina, I started this podcast. And this podcast has been my saving grace. This podcast is what has kept me from gambling. Talking, I like to say talking helps. I think other people say it too, but it's always been my motto of talking helps. And that is what has stopped me from gambling, is talking about my addiction and getting into helping others. Eventually, you've heard Jeff on this podcast. I met Jeff pretty early on in this podcast, and he became my co-host. And Jeff is the one who introduced me to working in recovery, not just doing the podcast, but actually like working in recovery and trying to help other people. And I owe all that to Jeff, to introducing me to people who work in this field. And it's been a crazy, awesome journey. But that's my story. That is my gambling story. Can talk more about the podcast and kind of recapping the podcast and what's happened since in the next episode, maybe, or a few episodes down the road. I contacted a bunch of people today. If you're listening to this and you've contacted me, I'm going back through all my emails. I emailed probably about 15 people today back that I haven't emailed over the course of the last while because I've been going through some personal stuff. But I emailed about 15 people and set up the appointments I could set up and set up some people to be on the podcast. And if I haven't gotten to you yet, I will get to you. The more stories, the merrier. Every story helps somebody. All of our stories matter. Talking about your addiction, it is awesome that people get into recovery and can stop gambling and help themselves and help their family by not gambling, not engaging with that behavior that harmed them so much. And then there are more people who want to help others by telling their story. And I hope you will do that on here or on your own. Start your own podcast. I would recommend, if you want to start your own podcast, absolutely, it's wonderful. But I would recommend doing video and YouTube. It's something I didn't really do. I've started to do with Christina Cook from the Broke Girl Society, one of my good friends in recovery, who's awesome. And she and I do the Bet Free Life, which is a video thing on YouTube you can find. But I didn't do this podcast as a video thing because in 2015, when I started the podcast, YouTube was a thing, but it wasn't like a video thing that I was doing much. I like the idea of not showing my face and just talking. But the field has really grown. There are more people sharing their stories. You can all share your stories, whether it's through social media or in person at GA meetings or in your communities. But I think this is evidence, and all the people I've talked to are evidence, that sharing your story will help somebody. I get people who email me who ask to talk to the person from a specific episode that was on a specific episode talking about a specific thing, right? Like, I'm no genius in gambling addiction. I've learned a lot through doing this podcast, but I don't know everything. I just think I'm smart because I talk to good people, people who are willing to share about themselves, people who are in relationships, people who are sons, who are daughters, who are cousins, who are affected others, who are gambling with the stock market or with online on the phone or in the casino or with sports betting, or with baseball cards, with Pokemon cards, or, anything that can be construed as gambling. These days, people are so willing to tell their story and to help others, and it's free. It's free help to listen to someone's story and to identify with them and to realize that you can stop the thing that harms you. And in this particular case, we're talking about gambling, and gambling harmed us all. One way or another, gambling harmed us all. And it's important for those people that love us and ourselves, who love ourselves. It's important to love yourself. And it's important for all of us to not do the thing that harms us. And that is gambling in this case. So please, if you want to share your story, email me, leestreetpod@gmail.com. And if you want to start your own thing and tell your own stories, do that. Do that. When I started this podcast, I was somebody who wanted to be in entertainment. So starting a podcast seemed like a natural thing. I liked being on a stage in front of people, and I had a good time doing that sort of thing. And I had ambitions of like, oh, this podcast will be huge and I will make money and earn a living from this podcast. That is not the case. But it is big enough where people hear it and they hear what we talk about. And I'm no genius. It's the people that I talk to in recovery who are the geniuses who share their story. I'm just the avenue through which people can do it. And I would implore you all, if you are willing, if you are okay socially, to tell your story, because it will help somebody. Even if it helps one person, it is damn worth it. It is damn worth it. I have enjoyed this, July 23rd. It's August 16th. It's 11:16 at night. I got back from a GA meeting tonight, and that's what inspired me to do this podcast. I have 10 years of not gambling, not placing a bet in a casino. That's the thing that harmed me, placing a bet in a casino. I'm so happy that I did not gamble on my phone, because that is way more addictive than going to the casino. It's all addictive, but gambling on your phone is so addictive. And for those of you that are stuck with that, I wish you the best. I hope you can get out of it. It's so hard to stop gambling. It's so hard. People say just stop. And it is true. Like, yeah, just stop. Like that would be a good thing, but it's hard because you have urges, and urges take over our body and they make us do it. So recovery is possible. And that's the best thing. There is hope. There is recovery. There are plenty of us out there now telling our stories. There's so many more people telling their stories now than when I started this podcast. And you should, if you know anybody who tells their story, listen to them. They know what they're talking about. And to all you, I wish you well. I wish you a good night. It's been fun to tell my story again. I haven't done this in a long time in this podcast where it's been my story the whole way through. But I never thought that this would be my life, talking about gambling addiction the rest of my life. But here we are. And it is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And I am grateful that I have this opportunity to do this. I am grateful that there are people that listen. And for me, the coolest aspect about this is seeing worldwide. There's a little map on the hosting mechanism that I use for the podcast that shows me where people listen from. And literally, I mean, not literally, but like the amount of countries where people listen from is incredible. And it's such an addiction that we are all dealing with now, and now more than ever, right? Like it's everywhere. The advertising is everywhere, whether it's legalized or black market, it is everywhere. And celebrity endorsements make it everywhere. But we can get past it. We can do it. We are good people who just got taken over by an addiction, but there's a whole lot more of life to live. And I hope you all go out there and you live it to your fullest. And this has been so much fun to say. And I wish you all the best. Please email me if you ever want to talk. I'd be happy to chit chat. Good night. Talking helps. I love that phrase.